So the purpose of our budget hearing annually is to share with the public the work that the administrative team and the Board of Education has completed over the last 5-6 months to develop next year's budget and explain the details of the budget, what's included in it, and how the budget will support our students and instruction into the upcoming school year. So to begin, we will look at our Amherst CSD mission, which drives all of our decisions. Talk about the budget, our projected property tax rate. We'll explain the contingency budget and give you some information on that, as well as what we will be asking of our voters for the budget vote and board member election. So our mission to prepare all students to excel in a dynamic world through the development of their abilities to reason, solve problems, apply knowledge, communicate, and collaborate effectively. That drives every decision, and it's at the forefront of everyone's mind when we're making the decisions, not only on where we're going to put our dollars, but how we're going to staff our programs, what programs we're going to add, making sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students so that they can find success. We'll start with revenue. Our property tax levy is projected to decrease. It's a tax compliant levy of a negative 0.7%, which it includes a tax base growth factor of 1.0014, so there's very little growth in the town of Amherst. The CPI is capped at 2%, so it was higher than 2% this year, but the tax cap formula limits us to a 2%. And we're allowed to include capital exclusions of about $980,000, and that's the difference between voter authorized expenses and state aid that we received to help offset those. We had some large changes in state aid this year. We are projecting just over $22 million in state aid, which also included an increase of $2.8 million in foundation aid for the upcoming school year. The current legislation identifies phasing in foundation aid over a 3-year span. So next year will be year 2 of that phase-in, which ideally, hopefully, the following year in year 3, we would receive another $2.8 million. Our building aid on our state aid runs did show an increase of $1.5 million. We were anticipating and expecting that, and that is the building aid that's coming in for the capital project we're just wrapping up now, the 2016 $30 million capital project. And additionally, we found out a couple weeks ago that the budget includes an increase of $378,000 for the expansion of our UPK program, which allows us to add full-day programming. So currently we had half-day programming because we wanted to serve the maximum number of students possible. But now we have additional funds will allow us to have a combination of both full-day and half-day programming to best serve the needs of our families. And we're working on how that's going to roll out and what that's going to look like now. So stay tuned, much more to come in the next couple weeks. While our federal aid is not part of our general fund budget and not part of what we ask our voters to authorize in May, we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the federal aid that was allocated to our district in the last 2 years. These are a handful of the big stimulus dollars that came to our district. The first one is the CARES Act, which was the first stimulus package that was released, and our allocation was $467,000. That was last year's money and was also a reduction in our state aid that year. So while we had the federal funds, it wasn't an increase to our overall budget. However, all of the other grants were. So we had the CRISA Act, which was number 2, which was $2.9 million, ARPA, which was $3.1 million, and then 2 smaller ones that came in most recently, the IDEA ARPA grant, which is just over $200,000, which is specifically to support special education programming, and the Homeless Children and Youth grant, which was just over $10,000. It was based on the students identified in our district that have been deemed homeless or are experiencing a homeless situation over the last 12 months, and these are dollars specifically to help them in their continuity of education and any needs that they may have beyond the educational setting. Our revenue budget does include transfers of reserves of $80,000, $60,000 from the tax certiorari, and $20,000 from the unemployment reserve. And both of those are offset by expenditure lines that equal. So if we don't end up spending those monies, we won't reduce them from the reserve. We have a fund balance allocation of $1 million, which is also equally offset by our contingency line on the expenditure side. And our total allocation of fund balance and reserves, it's actually $1.08 million. So it's $1,080,000, which was a slight increase over the prior year, but it's because we increased our allocation on that contingency line. Overall, we have a revenue budget of $68.3 million, which is an increase over the current year of 6.19%. On the expenditure side, our personnel expenses are increasing just over 5%, which is $1.6 million. And that is attributed to personnel costs, contractual obligations, and our substitute costs. On the benefit side, ERS rate is decreased, so we saw savings in our budget there of $222,000, but our TRS rate is increasing, and that's a dollar amount increase of $267,000. And while the ERS is decreasing over 3% and TRS is only going up about 0.5%, we have much more in salaries on the TRS side than we do on the ERS side. So that increase in the TRS rate always has a dramatic impact on our budget. Health insurance is projected at $7.2 million, which is will result in a 2.9% increase to our overall budget and our premiums for our employees. We're not anticipating any increase in our workers' comp premium. We've made some changes to our 403B contribution, which is a matching benefit that we have for many of our employees, and we increased our retirement benefits payment budget by $80,000, and that's just in anticipation of retirement benefits that may or may not be needed next year, but it allows us the room in our budget if we do need to make those payments. General support is increasing 17% or $391,000. We've increased our budgets for our liability insurance premiums, significant increases in our utility expenses for natural gas and electric costs. We added funds to our legal fees lines, and we restored some previous cuts to our buildings and grounds contract service lines and the materials and supply lines. So in prior years, those lines were reduced to help balance our budget. So now we're just trying to get that back up to the level that's really needed. And then on the curriculum budget, we transferred some funds from the professional development lines up into the contract service line just to help reduce budget transfers during the year. This budget does maintain our capital outlay project, and we'll talk about that a little more in detail in a couple slides. And as I mentioned, we're continuing the contingency line appropriation. It's $1 million. It's fully offset by fund balance, so it has no negative impact on our taxpayers. Our instruction is increasing about $285,000, or just over 6%, and we're increasing our lines for charter school tuition, special education tuition, and contract services for special education, health service payments, which are payments we make to other public schools when Amherst residents attend private schools within their district boundaries. We had some budget increases in our athletic department, and we transferred some funds from our BOCES services up into our software lines, or vice versa, software to BOCES. It's still going to be software purchases, but we're able to get them through BOCES instead of buying them direct from the vendor, which helps increase our BOCES aid in the following year. There was a decrease in this area because we discontinued the grant writer services that we had subscribed to last year. And in the community education budget, we previously had funds in both salary codes and contract service codes. So we've moved all the contract service money into salary codes, which is more appropriate for independent contractor versus employee. we're treating them as actual employees, not independent contractors. Our BOCES budget is increasing about $775,000, so it is a large increase, but we do have another IPA technology purchase anticipated for next year, which is part of our long-range plan for maintaining our technology hardware and our replacement cycle. We had an increase in CTE enrollment, so Amherst does not limit the number of students who participate in CTE services. So that will fluctuate from year to year based on the interest of our high school students. We did have an increase in special education programming for students attending BOCES programming. We added some PD support, and that was through the curriculum office. And we increased some funds in the BOCES lines for athletic software and different athletic services. And again, the increase in our BOCES lines helps our future revenue budget by increasing our state aid in the area of BOCES revenue. Transportation had a smaller increase of about 2.6%. We are on a extension of our current contract, so we did not go out to bid this year, but we did add additional funds to increase our after-school buses at 3 of our buildings, middle school, Smallwood, and Windermere, which will not only help extracurricular activities at the elementary building, but also will provide additional supports for families when kids need to stay after for any academic needs or additional educational support needs, especially if the parents can't, come pick up the kids. So being able to add those services to those buildings was helpful to them. And on the debt service, we're increasing about 4.5%. or $243,000, and that is in accordance with the bonds that we've closed on over the last few years and was offset by the increase in building aid. For our staffing changes for next year, we had about $200,000 of an increase in staffing changes. We did add an art teacher, which will be shared between the middle school and Windermere. We added a position in our grounds department, which is partially offset by some part-time summer work help that we used to hire. We won't hire those part-time people now. We'll have a full-time position. We're adding a central registrar, which will support all 4 buildings. We have funds in the budget to add an ICT teacher either in Windermere or Smallwood based on the needs of our elementary students and the caseloads that may change over the next handful of months based on students registering or CSE meetings when student services change. We previously had a .8 science position in middle school, which we are increasing to a full-time position. We added 2 coaching stipends in the athletic budget, girls flag football, which was funded through a donation this year, and strength and conditioning coach for next year, which will support all of our students, not only athletes, but will be available in the fitness centers in the high school as well next year. In the nursing department, we had 2 part-time nurses in the high school. We're reducing the part-time positions and replacing them with a full-time position, but then we are also maintaining another full-time position, which will be a floating nurse that will assist all 4 buildings throughout the year next year, not only for absences, but also for any additional testing or COVID needs that might come up as we go through the year. And we previously had 3 self-contained classrooms in Smallwood, and we are collapsing one of those classrooms based on our student enrollment, but all of the employees that were assigned to that classroom are being reassigned to other positions in the district, so there were no positions that were eliminated. We had 6 retirements this year. All were teachers. 5 were at the high school and 1 was at the middle school, and all positions are being rehired. So all of that combined gives us an expenditure budget of $68.3 million, matching our revenue, so we do have a balanced budget, and it's an increase in expenditures of $6.2 million. So part of the requirements of our budget, we are required to share our budget in different formats. So we just went through different areas of the budget, both on the revenue and expenditure side, but we're also required to break our budget into a tripartite budget and a component budget. So the tripartite budget compares administrative expenses, capital expenses, and program expenses, and then shows the percentage of change and the percentage of the budget for each. The component budget further breaks that down into 5 categories: general support, instruction, transportation, employee benefits, and debt transfers. And again, breaks it down to show the percent change in each category as well as the percent of the budget in each category. What I always like to see in these breakdowns is the amount of money of our overall budget that we're focusing to program and instruction. So in the top part, more than 75% of our budget, that's exactly where we want it to go because it's most directly affecting our students. And on the component budget, it's 56%, so more than half of it, even when it's broken up into 5 parts, is going directly to our instruction of our students. Our capital outlay project, so our budget does include a $100,000 line for capital outlay, which allows us to do small projects annually and receive building aid the following year. We haven't determined the scope of work yet for that project because we're working on different areas for a capital project, so that'll kind of all go together to fit the pieces together. But in the past, we've done sidewalks at both elementary buildings. We've done an emergency generator at the middle school, entryways, ramps, and both elevators at the elementaries. So overall, we have a balanced budget of $68.3 million. The long-range projections of the 23-24 and 24-25 do show budget deficits, but this is very, very conservative, and we actually keep our revenue somewhat flat in the outgoing years by assuming that there's no increase in foundation aid. So doing this helps give us a better picture of our expenditures and how they're increasing year over year, and also shows our reliance on on state aid increases from year to year. So when we hear that foundation aid is being frozen, we know exactly how that's going to affect us. If we're going to get a 3% increase or a $2.8 million increase because it's being fully funded, this is a very quick way for us to see how that's going to affect our long-range planning. So with a negative tax levy, we would expect our tax rate to go down, and we are expecting that. It's a decrease of about 15 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. We do not have the updated assessment from the town yet for the upcoming tax year, so we used last year's assessment. So assuming the assessment stays the same or relatively the same, homeowners should see a reduced tax rate on their bills. So one of the other requirements during budget development is to share with the community what happens in the event that the budget fails. So if we were required to adopt a contingent budget, there are more restrictions on our spending and on our tax levy. So in a contingent budget, we are not allowed to increase our levy more than what it was last year. What's a little bit unique this year is we were projecting a tax decrease. So under a contingent budget, we would actually keep our tax levy at 0, which would be more taxes to our taxpayers than what we are proposing. Something that wasn't necessarily thought about when the tax cap formula was developed. But with that, we are not allowed to permit the community to use our facilities without them paying the full operating costs of those facilities. We cannot purchase any new equipment, so any equipment codes that we have in our budget automatically go to 0. No non-essential maintenance can be performed. Capital expenditures outside of emergency cannot be performed. So like the capital outlay, we wouldn't be able to do that unless there was an emergency and something failed that would prevent us from delivering instruction. Non-unionized employees are not allowed to receive any increases or raises. And it would result in a decrease in spending of about $570,000 when we pull all those things out, but would actually be an increase to our taxpayers because we would actually have a higher levy than our current budget shows. So would result in a contingent budget of $67.7 million, which is an increase in spending of $3.4 million, or 5.3% increase.
Given the amount of, obviously not everyone votes for our budget, in favor of our budget each year. Are we communicating this well, or are we planning to? So when, a certain population comes in and says, hey, no, I don't like any, they realize that it's gonna be an increase, I think.
It could potentially be an increase if we adopt, so if the budget fails, the board has a decision to make. There's a re-vote day in June. You can go out to the public with the same budget. You can go out to the public with a reduced budget, or you can go out to the public with or you can just adopt a contingent budget. So you have three choices. So if the board decided they were going forward with another budget, whether it was the same budget or a decreased budget, and it didn't pass again, then we'd have no choice but to adopt a contingent budget. So in that instance, yes, voting no for the budget would increase your taxes, which is a very unique situation and doesn't happen very often. We do share this information right now. It'll be posted on our website and as part of our budget newsletter that goes out to all of our taxpayers. Fortunately, our community has been very supportive of our budgets in the past, and in the last 5 years, the budgets have passed between 75 and 85% approval rating, which is wonderful. But it is a possibility, and it's important that everybody understands what the effects of that will be. So we will ask our voters to approve our spending limit. So we provide all of this other information, but the only question as far as the budget that we're really asking the voters for approval on is our spending limit, which is $68.3 million. There are 2 seats on the board that are up for election, 2 incumbent candidates, Lori Goldhawk and Dominic Vivolo. And those are 3-year terms, which will end in June of 2025. So what are the facts of our budget? Our budget focuses on instruction, health and safety, and supports the social and emotional needs of our students, which has been a large focus over the last few years, specifically with the pandemic and the struggles that our students have been facing. All programs, athletics, and extracurriculars remain. Nothing was cut and nothing was reduced. The state's foundation aid increase allows us to propose a balanced budget and maintain a consistent appropriation of reserves. So we didn't need to dive into our reserves in order to balance our budget in order to offer these programs to our families. We were able to do that through the increase in the state foundation aid. Federal stimulus funds are used to increase programming above and beyond our general fund budget to help close learning gaps and further support SEL for our students. The tax levy is compliant with a negative 0.69% decrease, which means we do not require a supermajority for approval. We need a simple majority of 50% plus 1. And a passed budget allows continued usage of our facilities and our grounds by the community without having to impose any additional charges or fees. So please, we ask our community to vote Tuesday, May 17th at the high school. We'll be there all day, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. On the expenditure budget limit and 2 Board of Education seats. And if anyone is unavailable and will not be in town on that day, they can contact Mrs. Custodi for an absentee ballot. So with that, at this point, another change from our normal budget presentation. If anyone has any questions, this is an opportunity to ask questions and get immediate answers.
So if any of you audience people would like to ask questions, you're allowed to at this.
Don't all jump at the chance.
Up until what point can you get absentee ballots?
You can get it actually up to the day before,
Okay.
where I would personally deliver it. And then it would have to be returned by 5 o'clock the day of the vote.
Okay.
Typically, Ms. Custodian, how many you hand out? How many absentee ballots do you hand out in a typical year?
We get our information from the Board of Elections, and they have a list of disabled, permanently disabled, and that's about 270 people. So I end up sending out usually 20 above that with people that call in or contact.
And you get a decent rate of return on all those?
No. Yeah, but it's minimal.
Do you get a better rate of return on the people who actually requested the absentee
Yes.
ballots? Right.
All of those will be returned.
So the handicap list is generated by Erie County Board of
Right.
Elections, so those automatically go, whether people asked for them or not. The other absentee ballots are by request only,
Right.
so they made the effort to contact Ms. Custodian, fill out the application, get the ballot. I think those come back.
All of them come back.
Yes, but the handicapped ones just
Right.
automatically go. Any other questions? So that ends the budget hearing, and we can now turn the meeting back over to Board President Simon.
Great.